All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Ready, camera,
Go.
talent. Ready, camera,
And cue talent.
3, 2, 1.
Record.
Greetings and thanks for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we run down some of the big stories making headlines. I'm your host, John Phillips. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is PJTV contributor Michelle Fields. And here in studio, we're joined by stand-up comic Stephen Cruiser. On today's show, we're talking about the top 3 threats facing the United States. Talk about some alliteration there. And we begin with Michelle.
My pick for the top threat facing the United States is ISIS. ISIS has been a growing threat to the U.S. and the world. The terror group used social media to spread its message of hate. They have also used Twitter and other websites to recruit new members from across the world and from here in the U.S. The group is also responsible for beheading Americans, including journalist Steven Sotloff. ISIS members claim the beheading was in retaliation for U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. The big question remains how to stop ISIS from growing. John, what do we do? I mean, should we be putting more troops on the ground, or what? I mean, how do we fight something like this?
Here's what I think is different between what ISIS presents now and what we dealt with in terms of international terrorism in the 70s, 60s, and before that. And that's this. The biggest threat in terms of ISIS for us is the internet, because they are recruiting people worldwide, including in Western countries. England, we've seen it happen. France, we've seen it happen. Even here in the United States, they're taking these lone wolves and they're getting them to subscribe to their radical beliefs, and they're getting them to be willing to go shoot up people at Fort Hood or bomb people at the Boston Marathon, all in the name of this idiotic cause. But that's the way you got to fight it. I almost think you have to rework the laws. So if you have people that are communicating with ISIS, and ISIS is getting people to do their dirty work in these Western countries, you have to find a way to stop that, because just going into these countries where ISIS operates and cutting off the head or getting the leaders, that's not going to solve the problem, because they're still going to radicalize people on the internet. I think that's the bigger threat.
Well, and we're bumping into what has been the problem in the last couple of years with people trying to figure out how much freedom they want to give up vis-a-vis, the government monitoring the internet traffic. The stuff with Snowden and everybody else was all about the government supposedly monitoring for terrorist activity, and now the public is up in arms saying, well, you're monitoring a little too much. How do you find the balance there? That's one of the difficult things here. You're right. They have to pay attention to people who are communicating, doing things like this. But where is the balance in that? Nobody knows that yet. And as to Michelle's original question, I don't know what to do ultimately, but I know that these surgical airstrikes aren't going to work. There isn't a real non-administration military official who says they're going to work. They're just going to, they don't seem to be on their heels at all since we've been hitting them with airstrikes. So I think it's a long-term problem that will ultimately spiral out of control until we're forced to put boots on the ground again.
Well, how about it, Michelle? What's the bigger threat to us in terms of ISIS? Is it the terrorists on the ground over in the Middle East, or is it the recruitment on the internet?
I think it's more the recruitment on the internet. We just saw that a few teenagers from Colorado were apprehended. They were going to fight with ISIS, and they were Americans. I think that is the biggest threat, because it's very difficult to find and track these young people who are interested in joining ISIS, because they're sort of hidden. Usually they're hermits, they're reclusives, and you don't know much about them. And then we have something like the Boston bombing. So I think that is the biggest threat.
All right, Cruiser, what do you have for us?
My pick for the top threat facing the United States is a nuclear Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said to world leaders that Iran is a bigger threat than ISIS. He warns that Iran is a nuclear threshold state with thousands of centrifuges, and that it can manufacture the material for a nuclear bomb in a short period of time. That is what we should be worrying about here in America. So it's pick your poison over there right now. ISIS is the more pressing threat at the moment, obviously, and the one that grabs more headlines. And while they're doing this, Iran is quietly toiling in the background, developing its nuclear capability, and people aren't paying as much attention to that anymore. It's like almost off the radar completely at the moment. Sure, they're having some talks. Sure, they're having some negotiations. Again, that's one of those things that no sane person thinks is actually working. So long term, I think them with the bomb, because they don't like ISIS that much either sometimes. You know, they war over there. Iran with the bomb will flex its muscle in the Middle East and then hold the oil hostage, and then that creates a ripple in the world economy, and it's a long-term, nasty threat. But again, what do we do about that? Is diplomacy the only answer there, or do we have to be tougher?
Well, here's my thoughts on Iran. I think that Iran is emboldened when you have a weak president that they don't fear in the White House. And the minute you change who's in the White House, you change the dynamics of what goes on in Tehran. Because they realize that if you have a Ronald Reagan or you have a Mitt Romney or you have someone who they look at and they say, all right, this guy means business, they're less likely to do what they're doing right now. But if you have a guy in there that's weak, that they can push around, that they think that they can get away with anything that they want to do, then that's exactly what they're going to do. I think come November 2016, we're going to see a very different side of Iran.
Piggybacking on that, Michelle, several years ago, there was a lot of unrest in the streets of Tehran during the re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and it looked like there might be a little revolution in progress there, and the United States, with its new Nobel Peace Prize winning president, decided to back off and not do anything there. Do you think, as John said, when we get a new president, do you think there's a chance that that kind of unrest with the younger Iranians will be possible again, or do you think that this regime there has effectively quelled that for good?
Oh, I absolutely agree with John. I think Iran sees that we have a president that's weak, that's really not going to do anything. He's not going to engage. He sort of just wants to stay out and just be sort of someone who just looks at it and is not really involved in it. But I think the dynamic will completely change if we get someone who is more hawkish and more willing to put his foot down. And I think when that happens, Iran, we're going to see a very different Iran.
My pick for the top threat facing the United States is infectious disease. And this is something that has changed dramatically over time. You look back at human history, you look back at infectious disease, take Tay-Sachs disease. That was a disease that primarily faces Eastern Europeans, people who are Jewish, because they didn't have airplanes back then. Yeah. They didn't have transatlantic travel. You look at sickle cell anemia, that's something that primarily faces blacks. There are different diseases that were threats to different groups because there wasn't worldwide travel. The difference now is that we have these new diseases like Ebola and the new enterovirus that are popping up, but we have travel that will allow people not just to stay in their own little area, but to get on a plane and go to any continent they want to go to and infect any additional group of people that they wish to infect. We saw it happen with Ebola when patient 0 came to Dallas, Texas. We're now seeing this enterovirus spread like wildfire, which I'm convinced is caused by the illegal alien overload at the southern border. And when you don't have control over your borders and you don't have control over your airports, you don't have control. We have a president that won't issue a travel restriction on people coming from Liberia. When you're that wide open, to me, this is a threat that could really do damage and kill tens of thousands of people, if not more.
It's political correctness that's killing us right now. People don't want to offend anyone. That's why they won't close the borders. The World Health Organization is finally going to meet today to start discussing travel restrictions, lo these many weeks later. But yeah, this is one of the, when people like us talk about border security, we're talking about, you know, so many different things. We're talking about the drug trafficking. We're talking about this kind of problem. We're talking about, that's why you want to talk about securing the border so that the terrorists can't sneak in. So, and the people on the other side, the pro-amnesty people, are always reducing it just to an economic issue. They're always reducing it to, oh, the plucky guy coming across, working in the hotel and sending the money back to Mexico. And they turn it into this single, they distill it down to this thing that's not what it's about. It's this comprehensive issue that creates so many problems, and now, and it can literally kill people in a variety of ways. And it's the political correctness that keeps people from having a real discussion about border security.
You know, Michelle, prior to the welfare state, prior to FDR and the New Deal and and all that, when we had waves of immigration coming from Europe, we had people coming from Ireland, we had people coming from Eastern Europe, we had people coming from Italy, all the cruisers people, all these people come to the United States. We did a better job of checking them out to make sure that they didn't have infectious diseases when they came through Ellis Island, to make sure they didn't have tuberculosis or anything else that was going to pose a threat or prove that they wouldn't be able to provide for themselves and their families. We did a better job then than we do now with all the government resources that we have, all the federal departments that we have, all the tax money, the billions of dollars of tax money that go into Washington, D.C. We did it better then than we do now.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you hear Republicans talking about securing the border, this is what they're talking about. But Democrats always like to say, oh, they're racist. They don't want any of these people in here because of their prejudices. And that's not the case at all. When we're talking about securing the border, we're talking about these types of issues. We need to know who's coming in here, whether they are ill or not. We need to know that, because someone can come in here with the Ebola virus, which happened, and spread it to tons of American citizens. I mean, that is a legitimate concern. It's a national security issue as well.
You know what? They don't have it in Nigeria. They don't have Ebola.
Or Senegal.
Because they cut off immigration.
And in Senegal, they shut down the travel.
That's true.
Yep.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. We want to know what you think about our picks for the top 3 threats facing the United States. Be sure to leave your comments in the comment section below. I'm John Phillips for Stephen Cruiser, joining me here in Los Angeles, and Michelle Fields in the nation's capital. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.